Dr. Elena Carter wiped sweat from her brow as the temporal displacement engine hummed to life. 8 years of research, 3 failed prototypes, and countless skeptical colleagues had led to this moment. The cylindrical chamber pulsed with blue-white energy as quantum stabilizers kept the temporal field from collapsing. "Power levels stable at 87%, announced Dr. Patel, her eyes fixed on the monitoring station. "Quantum envelope holding." Elena nodded, trying to keep her hands from trembling. If this worked, history would remember this basement laboratory at the Global Science Institute as the birthplace of time travel. If it failed, they'd just be another team of overly ambitious physicists who burned through millions in funding with nothing to show for it. "Initiating temporal fold," she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Preparing data packet transmission." The lab fell silent as everyone watched the quantum display. The test was simple in concept yet revolutionary in implication. Send a precisely coded quantum data packet 3.2 seconds into the past. If successful, they would receive the data before they sent it. The ultimate proof of concept. "Field integrity at 93%, called out Dr. Weiss from his station. "Better than projected." Elena held her breath as she pressed the final sequence. The engine's hum deepened, vibrating through the floor and into her bones. The air seemed to thicken around the chamber. A soft chime rang out from the receiver station. "We've got signal acquisition," said Patel, her voice rising with excitement. "Data packet received." Elena checked the timestamp, 3.2 seconds before they had sent it. For a moment, no one spoke. The implications were too enormous. They had just transmitted information backward through time, violating what most physicists considered an immutable law of reality. The celebration lasted precisely 47 seconds before the security alarms blared throughout the facility. "What's happening?" Elena rushed to the main terminal. "System breach." "No." Weiss looked up from his screen, face pale. "Something in orbit just scanned us." Massive energy signature appeared out of nowhere directly above the facility. The overhead lights flickered as every connected device in the lab, screens, phones, tablets, displayed the same message simultaneously. "Temporal manipulation detected. Assessment team en route. Cease all research." "What is this?" Dr. Patel whispered. "Some kind of hack." Elena's terminal pinged with an incoming transmission. The video feed showed a massive object moving into Earth's orbit, sleek, otherworldly, and impossibly large. Government satellites were already tracking it, and military channels were erupting with chatter. "It's not a hack," Elena said, understanding washing over her like ice water. "We weren't the only ones monitoring this experiment." As she rushed to secure their research data, reports flooded in from observatories worldwide. More objects were appearing in orbit. The stars had been watching humanity's technological progress, and they didn't look pleased with our latest achievement. "Shut it down," Elena ordered, already downloading the core algorithms to a secure drive. "Copy everything and prepare for evacuation." They had just changed human history, but Elena suddenly feared they might have also shortened it significantly. The question wasn't whether humanity had successfully created time travel technology. The question was whether we'd live long enough to use it. 3 days after the quantum breakthrough, the sleek, shimmering craft descended through cloud cover and hovered above the White House lawn. Military jets circled helplessly overhead, their targeting systems malfunctioning whenever they locked onto the vessel. CNN's helicopter footage captured what would become the most viewed broadcast in human history. The craft, resembling polished obsidian stretched into impossible geometries, settled onto the grass without disturbing a single blade. No landing gear was visible. It simply stopped in perfect equilibrium 2 inches above the ground. President Mercer stood on the White House steps, flanked by military generals and scientific advisors, including Dr. Elena Carter, summoned from protective custody hours earlier. Her data drive containing the temporal displacement engine research felt heavy in her pocket. "They specifically requested your presence," National Security Advisor Hammond had told her during the helicopter ride. They mentioned you by name. A seam appeared in the craft's seamless hull, widening into an elliptical doorway. Light spilled out, momentarily blinding the waiting human delegation. When vision cleared, 3 figures stood on the lawn. They were humanoid but clearly not human. Tall and slender with iridescent skin that seemed to shift between translucent and metallic. Their eyes, 3 per face, arranged in a triangle, lacked pupils but shimmered with intelligence. They wore what appeared to be liquid metal suits that flowed with their movements. The central figure stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Xorin of the Guardians of Kronos," it said in perfect, unaccented English. "We are the protectors of the temporal lanes that bind reality together." As President Mercer began a formal greeting, Xorin raised a 6-fingered hand, interrupting him. "The Secretary of State will trip on the second step in approximately 4 seconds, the alien said calmly. "Your Chief of Staff will receive news about the Beijing delegation exactly 17 seconds after that." President Mercer frowned, then gasped as events unfolded exactly as described. The secretary stumbled, catching herself on the railing, and moments later, the Chief of Staff's phone buzzed with the anticipated message. "Time is our domain," Xorin continued. "We have monitored your civilization since your ancestors first contemplated the stars. Your species has now taken its first steps into temporal waters, waters filled with predators you cannot imagine." Elena stepped forward. "If you're so advanced, why not help us master this technology safely? Share your knowledge instead of simply appearing to intimidate us." The crowd tensed at her boldness, but Soren's attention focused entirely on her. "Dr. Elena Carter, primary architect of the temporal displacement engine," Soren said. "Your question reveals why intervention is necessary. Your species invariably seeks to master forces before understanding their consequences." The alien's third eye seemed to glow brighter. "We have observed 219 emergent civilizations develop temporal manipulation. Only 7 survived the experience. The others erased themselves from existence through paradox cascades or temporal wars." Soren extended an arm, and a holographic display materialized in the air. It showed Earth, but the continents were wrong, the oceans discolored. "This was your world in a timeline where you continued your research," Soren said. "We have seen your future, Dr. Carter. And in every timeline where humans control time, the universe burns." Elena stared at the hologram, noticing with horror that entire sections of the planet appeared to be missing. Not destroyed, but simply gone from reality, leaving impossible geometries in their place. "We come not as conquerors," Soren concluded, "but as surgeons, excising a cancer before it spreads. You have 30 days to dismantle all temporal research facilities worldwide. After that, we will do it for you." 6 months after the Guardian ultimatum, Elena stepped off the transport onto the Antarctic ice. Wind whipped snow against her insulated gear as she followed her escort toward what appeared to be an ordinary research station. The International Outpost officially studied climate patterns. The UN Security Council and all major governments had publicly agreed to the Guardian's terms, dismantling known temporal research facilities worldwide. Officially, Colonel Sarah Jong waited at the entrance, her weathered face revealing nothing as she scanned Elena's credentials. "Welcome to Station Omega, Dr. Carter," she said, voice barely audible above the howling wind, or as we call it off-record, Kronos Defiant. They descended in an elevator disguised as a storage freezer. Elena's ears popped as they dropped far deeper than she'd expected, 200 meters below the ice. Zhang explained. "Powered by geothermal energy and shielded from detection by experimental quantum dampening fields. 12 nations contributing resources and personnel under absolute secrecy." The elevator opened to reveal a sprawling underground complex humming with activity. Scientists from diverse backgrounds worked at stations surrounding a central chamber, a more advanced version of Elena's original temporal displacement engine. "You've improved the design," Elena observed, recognizing modifications to her original schematics. "Your work was brilliant," Zhang said, leading her through the facility. "But incomplete. We've had some Advantages in development. They entered a secure room filled with monitoring equipment. Screens displayed intercepted communications that, according to their timestamps, hadn't been sent yet. 3 weeks after their arrival, we captured a damaged Guardian scout vessel, Zhang explained. The pilot didn't survive, but the ship's systems remained partially functional. What we discovered was disturbing. She pulled up files showing evidence of Guardian involvement throughout human history, subtle manipulations dating back centuries. They'd been steering our development, Zhang continued, suppressing certain technologies, encouraging others. They didn't come because we discovered time travel. They came because we discovered it earlier than their models predicted. Elena studied the data. They'd been manipulating us all along. They're not protecting time, Zhang said grimly. They're controlling it. And us. Further along the corridor, they reached a medical wing where a man in a monitoring chamber was being examined by doctors. He looked exhausted but alert. Major Thomas Reed, Zhang introduced him. Our first successful human temporal navigator. Elena's eyes widened. You've achieved human transport. Reed nodded. 72 hours back, 72 forward. 3 jumps now. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been screaming. Doctor, they're lying to us about everything. He gestured for a tablet and pulled up footage he'd recorded during his last jump. It showed Guardian ships in orbit around Earth, far more than the 3 that had publicly arrived. They're bringing in reinforcements, Reed explained, preparing for something big. During my last jump, I infiltrated a communications hub they've established in Buenos Aires. His hands trembled slightly. They're identifying humans with specific genetic markers. People with unusual temporal sensitivity. What for? Elena asked, though she feared the answer. Elimination, Reed replied. And you're at the top of their list, along with everyone you've ever worked with, everyone in your family, and every human who carries similar genetic potential. He looked her in the eye. They're not here to stop our research, Dr. Carter. They're here to prune the human evolutionary tree. The first temporal strike hit Tokyo without warning. Elena watched the satellite feed in horror as a Guardian vessel positioned itself over the sprawling metropolis and released a pulse of energy unlike anything their sensors could identify. One moment the city stood proud against the bay. The next, it existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. Buildings phased between multiple architectural styles simultaneously. Traditional Japanese structures overlapping with futuristic skyscrapers and designs that had never existed at all. People in the streets experienced multiple versions of their lives concurrently, some collapsing from the psychological strain of contradictory memories flooding their consciousness. Timeline shearing, explained Dr. Hirano, the Japanese physicist who joined Chronos Defiant 3 months earlier. They're not destroying Tokyo, they're fracturing its timeline, creating a localized reality storm. Elena studied the readings. They're demonstrating their power, showing what happens when time is mishandled. Colonel Zhang entered the monitoring station at a run. Singapore is under attack now. Same pattern. The UN Security Council is in emergency session. Elena made the decision instantly. Prep the TDE. We're sending a counter-jump team. To stop the attacks, Zhang asked. To observe them, Elena replied. We need to understand exactly what they're doing before we can counter it. Reed led the 3-person team, jumping back 4 hours to positions near both target cities. They'd returned pale and shaken, but with critical data. During debriefing, Reed described something unexpected. We witnessed the attacks from beginning to end, he explained. But here's the strange part. Our brains recorded both timelines. We remember Tokyo as it was originally and how it appeared after the attack. Elena frowned. The Guardians modified reality, but you remember both versions. Yes, Reed confirmed. And when we monitored Guardian communications during the event, we realized they only perceive the new timeline they create. They don't retain awareness of the original. Elena's mind raced. Human brains process temporal shifts differently than Guardian physiology. They can manipulate time more effectively, but we can perceive those manipulations more clearly. Within hours, Alina developed a revolutionary theory. Humans possessed a unique ability to retain temporal awareness across timeline modifications, an evolutionary trait the Guardians lacked. This explained their determination to eliminate humans with stronger temporal sensitivity genes. "We're not just a threat because we developed time travel," Alina told the assembled scientists and military personnel. "We're a threat because we can perceive what they do to the timeline. We're witnesses to their manipulations." She quickly formulated a strategy, creating temporal echo teams, operatives who would make small, targeted jumps that remained beneath Guardian detection thresholds. Each jump created minor alterations too subtle for Guardian sensors, but compounded into significant advantages for the Resistance. The first Echo team deployed to redirect an evacuation route in Osaka hours before a Guardian attack, saving thousands. Another team altered security protocols at a research facility in Berlin, preserving critical data moments before Guardians seized the building. The Guardians responded with confusion, unable to understand how humans anticipated their moves. For the first time in millennia, they faced an enemy whose actions they couldn't predict or erase from history. Commander Vexus, leader of the Guardian tactical fleet, summoned his lieutenants. "Impossible," he hissed, studying reports of failed operations. "They're adapting to temporal warfare faster than any species we've encountered." His second-in-command suggested the obvious. "Perhaps we should accelerate the purge protocol." Vexus nodded grimly. "Target their genetic origination points. If we can't eliminate them in the present, we'll remove them from history entirely." Guardian Commander Vexus stood before the High Council's projection, his iridescent skin dimmed with concern. The 7 observer elders hovered as translucent apparitions, their three-eyed gazes boring into him. "Temporal Directive 47 has failed," he reported. "The humans are adapting to temporal warfare at an unprecedented rate." "Impossible," declared Elder Myrex. "Their species lacks the neural architecture for multi-timeline cognition." Vexus transmitted the field data. "Evidence suggests otherwise. Examination of captured resistance fighters reveals something unexpected in their genetic structure." Back at Cronus Defiant, Alina made the same discovery while developing a serum to enhance temporal perception. Under the microscope, human DNA samples exhibited unusual markers, genetic sequences that shouldn't exist in a species with no prior exposure to temporal energies. "These markers appear in every human sample we've tested," she explained to Colonel Zhang and the science team. "It's as if our DNA was exposed to temporal radiation long before we developed the technology." Dr. Katsuo, their geneticist, pointed to the enhanced scans. "These sequences act as quantum memory buffers. When reality shifts, these genetic structures retain impressions of the original timeline. That's why we can perceive changes the Guardians make." Alina's mind raced with implications. What if humans were naturally selected for this ability? What if something in our evolutionary past exposed us to temporal energy? While the scientists debated theories, Major Reed prepared his enhanced squad for their most ambitious mission. The newly developed TP7 serum coursing through their veins allowed them to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously without mental breakdown. 7 jumps, 7 teams, 7 targets. Reed briefed them. "We're creating a temporal support network across the past decade. Supply caches, technology drops, recruitment of key personnel, all before the Guardians arrived." The mission launched with precision timing between Guardian sensor suites. Reed's team executed their jumps flawlessly, establishing hidden resistance cells throughout recent history. They returned with crucial intelligence. The Guardians were now targeting human history itself, attempting to remove historical figures whose decisions led to temporal physics development. "They're going after pioneers in quantum mechanics, theoretical physics, even philosophers who first conceptualized time travel," Reed reported. "They're trying to prune the intellectual branches that led to our discovery." Alina stared at the timeline map showing Guardian incursions into humanity's past. "This isn't just about stopping our current research. They want to remove our potential entirely." That night, While reviewing genetic data, Elena discovered something that stopped her breath. The temporal markers in human DNA weren't random mutations. They followed specific patterns matching the quantum signature of the Guardian's own temporal technology. She called an emergency meeting with Colonel Jung and the command staff. "I know why the Guardians fear us," she said, displaying her findings. "These genetic markers aren't just similar to Guardian temporal signatures. They're identical. Somehow, human DNA has been exposed to their specific temporal technology in our evolutionary past." The implication stunned the room into silence. "They're not trying to prevent us from developing time travel," Elena continued. "They're trying to prevent us from becoming them." John frowned. "You're suggesting the Guardians and humans are connected," Elena finished. "And they know it. The question is, what exactly do they fear we'll discover if we continue down this path?" Outside the briefing room, the temporal displacement chamber hummed as technicians prepared for their most dangerous mission yet, a jump not decades or centuries back, but millions of years, targeting the ancestral homeworld of the Guardians themselves. Elena watched in horror as her childhood home in Philadelphia phased in and out of existence. The temporal attacks had escalated beyond military targets to strike at the personal histories of key resistance members. For most of the city, reality shifted between three different versions every few minutes. In one, her grandmother's Victorian house stood proudly on Maple Street. In another, an apartment building occupied the lot. In the third, nothing but an empty field stretched where the neighborhood should have been. "They're targeting our lineages," Elena told Zhang over the secure quantum link. "Not just erasing our present, but unraveling the threads of our past." Chromos-defiant sensors registered temporal disturbances across 5 continents, each centered on birthplaces or ancestral homes of scientists involved in time research. The Guardian strategy was becoming clear. If they couldn't eliminate humans with temporal sensitivity in the present, they would prevent those bloodlines from ever developing. Elena volunteered herself for the most dangerous mission yet, using a prototype temporal stabilizer to enter the fluctuating zone around her childhood home and attempt to anchor that section of reality. The device, reverse-engineered from Guardian technology, had never been field-tested. "This is suicide," John protested. "The stabilizer could trap you between timelines permanently." "My grandmother's house is the focal point," Elena insisted. "If they erase her from history, I never exist. None of my research happens. We have to hold this line." The team deployed Elena to Philadelphia via emergency temporal jump. She materialized on Maple Street as reality rippled around her. Pedestrians moved like ghosts, some vanishing mid-step as timeline variants competed for dominance. Elena activated the stabilizer, feeling its energy field envelop her as she approached her grandmother's house. The moment she crossed the property line, something unprecedented happened. The stabilizer interfaced with the competing timelines, and Elena experienced what the team would later call temporal vision, simultaneous awareness of multiple future possibilities. In one vision, humans evolved into beings remarkably similar to the Guardians, their 3 eyes adapted for perceiving multiple timelines simultaneously. In another, human and Guardian technology merged into something transcendent, beings of pure temporal energy that existed across all of time. In a third, darker future, humanity wielded time as a weapon, shattering reality itself in an endless war against enemies she couldn't identify. Most disturbing was the timeline where Earth stood empty, humans having disappeared entirely, replaced by Guardian settlements that seemed oddly familiar, as if they belonged there. The visions overwhelmed her, sending Elena crashing to her knees on her grandmother's porch. As she struggled to maintain consciousness, clarity struck with blinding force. The Guardians weren't merely afraid of humans developing time travel. They feared humanity because they'd seen futures where humans replaced them as the dominant temporal power. When the stabilizer finally anchored her grandmother's timeline, Elena activated her emergency return beacon. She materialized in Cronus defiant with blood trickling from her nose and eyes, but with a new understanding that changed everything. "We've been fighting this all wrong," she told the assembled team as medical staff attended to her. "The Guardians aren't trying to conquer us. They're trying to prevent themselves from being replaced." Her hand shook as she sketched what she'd seen. "We need to redirect all resources to a single mission. Nothing else matters now." "What mission?" Zhang asked. Alina's eyes reflected the determination that had first led her to crack the secrets of time. "We need to find out who the Guardians really are, and why they're so afraid of us becoming them." While most of the resistance engaged Guardian forces across history, Alina led a small team on what appeared to be a suicide mission. The enhanced temporal displacement engine hummed with power never before channeled through human technology. This wasn't a jump of decades or centuries. They were targeting millions of years in the past, aiming for the ancestral homeworld of the Guardians. "Temporal coordinates locked," announced Dr. Katsuo, his fingers dancing across the control panel. "Target era, 2.7 million years ago, based on genetic regression analysis of Guardian tissue samples." Alina, Reed, and two specialists stood in the displacement chamber, equipped with environmental suits designed to protect against whatever conditions they might encounter. Each carried a quantum anchor to ensure they could return to their own timeline regardless of what happened at the destination. "Remember," Alina reminded the team, "observation only. We're not changing anything. We're just confirming my theory." Colonel Zhang's voice came through the comm system. "You have 48 hours before automatic recall. If the Guardians detect this jump, they'll throw everything they have at this facility." The chamber filled with crackling energy as the displacement field formed around them. Alina felt the familiar sensation of time unfolding around her consciousness, but magnified 1,000-fold. The journey stretched longer than any previous jump, straining the limits of human perception. When reality stabilized, they stood on a rocky hillside overlooking a vast plain. Two moons hung in an amber sky above a landscape both alien and oddly familiar. "Atmosphere analysis confirms we've reached the correct temporal and spatial coordinates," the environmental specialist reported. "This is the Guardian homeworld, 2.7 million years ago." What they found left them speechless. The plain below held primitive settlements, beings struggling to survive on a dying world. But these weren't the Guardians they knew. Through high-powered optics, Alina observed beings that were unmistakably proto-human, bipedal hominids with emerging third eye structures that appeared to be early evolutionary adaptations. More shocking were the ancient monuments surrounding the settlements. Weathered stone pillars depicted the arrival of sky saviors, figures whose outlines matched advanced human time travelers. The primitive language inscribed on these stones, when processed through their translation algorithms, resolved into a proto-form of English. "This can't be right," Reed whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. Alina led the team to a temple structure where they discovered preserved records in a sealed chamber. The text translated perfectly into future English variants, describing the arrival of the ones who fold time, who've saved the indigenous population from extinction. "The Guardians aren't an alien species," Alina said, the truth finally clear. "They're humanity's future descendants, evolved after millennia of temporal manipulation." The genetic markers in human DNA weren't alien tampering. They were evolutionary echoes of what humanity would become. The Guardians opposed human time travel because they were trying to prevent their own creation paradox. Unaware they were ensuring it instead. As the team prepared to return, Reed discovered a hidden chamber beneath the temple. Inside lay a temporal beacon, Guardian technology, placed there millions of years ago, but designed to activate when humans first achieved time travel. "It's a closed loop," Alina realized. They've been fighting to prevent themselves from existing, and in doing so, guaranteed their own creation. The quantum anchors activated, pulling them back to their present. Alina clutched the ancient records as the temporal field enveloped them. She now understood what had to be done. The only solution that could break an endless cycle of creation and destruction that had repeated across countless timelines. Alina sat across from Guardian Supreme Commander Soren in a conference room that existed outside normal spacetime. The neutral meeting ground, a temporal bubble suspended between moments, had been Soren's suggestion after Elena's transmission containing evidence of their shared origins. The walls shimmered with chronometric energy, occasionally revealing glimpses of alternate timelines like windows into parallel worlds. "I know who you are," Elena said, sliding forward genetic analyses and photographs from the expedition. "You're fighting to prevent yourselves from existing, and in doing so, guaranteeing your creation." Soren remained silent for a long moment. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed his biomechanical mask, revealing features that, while alien, carried unmistakable human characteristics. The third eye, an adaptation for perceiving multiple timelines simultaneously, blinked independently of the other two. "The cycle has repeated 317 times that we've documented," he finally admitted. "Each time we try to prevent human time travel, we create circumstances that make it inevitable." "A predestination paradox," Elena said. "By trying to stop us, you ensure we develop the technology faster, more secretively, and more militaristically than we would have otherwise." Soren gestured, and a holographic display materialized between them, showing hundreds of timeline variants. "We've tried every possible intervention. Sometimes we arrive peacefully, sometimes as conquerors. We've attempted to guide human development away from temporal physics entirely. Every approach leads to the same outcome. Humanity discovers time travel, uses it unwisely, and creates us." "Because you've been approaching this as opponents," Elena said. "What if the solution isn't prevention, but partnership?" She outlined her proposal, a temporal accord between present humans and their future descendants. Instead of fighting across timelines, they would collaborate to navigate the delicate paradoxes that bound them together. "Your people fear us because of the futures you've seen," Elena continued. "But those futures only manifest in timelines where our relationship is adversarial. We need to create a new path, together." For the first time in their interactions, uncertainty crossed Soren's features. "The Council will resist. We've defined ourselves as time's protectors for millennia." "And you still can be," Elena insisted, "but as teachers and partners, not controllers. The loop can be broken, not by erasing either of us, but by changing how we interact within it." As the meeting concluded, Elena and Soren formalized the first articles of the Temporal Accord. Guardian forces would withdraw from hostile positions throughout history. In exchange, humanity would develop time travel under joint oversight, with safeguards against paradox cascades. Back at Kronos Defiant, the team celebrated cautiously as Guardian ships departed Earth orbit. Elena stood apart, studying a holographic image Exorin had given her, showing the evolutionary path from modern humans to Guardians, a journey of 1,000,000 years that had technically both already happened and not yet begun. Colonel Zhang joined her. "Do you trust them? They were trying to erase us days ago." "They were trying to erase themselves," Elena corrected, "and failing, because they never understood the nature of our connection." She deactivated the hologram. "We weren't their enemy. We were always their ancestors. The only question was whether we'd be wise enough to understand that before we tore reality apart finding out." As temporal storms across the planet began to subside, the first joint human Guardian research team assembled in what had once been a battleground. Together, they began charting a new future, one that would eventually lead humanity to evolve into the Guardians, who would then reach back through time not to prevent their existence, but to ensure it happened with minimal damage to the time stream. The ultimate twist wasn't that time travel would end humanity, but that it would transform us into the very beings we once feared.